Hi, what's up, everyone? It's Ian here from IBI Performance Coaching, and today I want to talk about the problem with habits and the approach that's proselytized by all those best-selling authors. There is, in fact, a dark side to habits, and it's one of the reasons why you struggle to keep the habits that you want to have. So let's get into it. All right, we got to start this conversation by defining what exactly habits are. Always define your terms if you want to have a productive conversation. So that's what we'll do at the beginning here. What is a habit? Well, in essence, a habit is nothing more than increasing the automaticity of certain behaviors through repetition over time, right? And obviously, there are things like attaching triggers to it so you know when to engage in the behavior. You can also attach rewards to it to help reinforce the behavior. Look at the books on these things like Tiny Habits, Atomic Habits, Charles Duhigg, The Power Habit. There are a ton of these habit books out there. You've probably read one or more of them at this point. So, what is the problem with this, with habit design and the way it's approached these days? Well, it's pretty simple. Habits are fantastic when it comes to reducing resistance to engaging in what we're going to call towards behaviors. We call them towards behaviors because they move you towards a future, towards a life that you actually are selecting, consciously selecting, rather than the default. So they reduce the resistance to these towards behaviors, whether it's writing a book and having the habit of actually sitting down at the same time each day and writing a certain number of words, or whether it's going to the gym because you want to get into better shape or improve your health. All right, maybe you struggle to make it to the gym because there's a lot of resistance there, but you develop the habit of getting your shoes on at the same time, getting in the car, and going to the gym. Okay, they reduce resistance, they make it easier to engage in toward behaviors. And they can also make it easier to engage in away from behaviors. Basically, things like addictions, right? Whether it's smoking cigarettes or alcohol addiction, these sorts of things are essentially just habits that have gotten completely out of control and they're away from in nature. Okay, so what could be bad about this? Well, besides the fact that you can have a negative habit, you can have an away from habit, the towards behaviors, the towards habits can also be problematic. Why? Well, I need to introduce the idea of what's called the eroding standards systems archetype. Now, in the study of systems, complex systems, living systems, anything like this, you encounter what are called archetypes. These are things that show up again and again, much like if you're familiar with something like Jungian archetypes, right? These are images, ideas, concepts, or bundles of concepts that show up again and again throughout human cultures, right? Well, systems archetypes show up in all manner of different systems, and they maintain certain, recognizable qualities across a whole range of systems. And the one we're going to talk about here is the eroding standards archetype. The eroding standards archetype happens when you set a standard for a certain kind of behavior, and you meet that standard until, for some reason, one time, you don't meet that standard. You fall short of that standard. And because there is no more or less immediate, or what we would call, there's no tightly coupled negative feedback. That is, you don't meet the standard, and there's no like immediate jab of something negative happening that your brain can easily associate with not meeting the standard. A new standard, a lower standard, becomes established in your mind. And so that maybe you go back to meeting the old standard, but now there's a gray zone there. There's a wiggle room. And so next time you don't hit the standard and nothing negative happens, that gets more firmly established. And repeat, rinse and repeat over time, the standard tends to erode. Standards rarely, improve, rarely get more difficult to meet over time, naturally. In fact, I would say naturally they never do that. The natural tendency is entropic. It's a reduction in the standard. It's towards something that's easier to do. So this is the eroding standards archetype, and you'll find it everywhere. And I'm going to give you an example. So they say practice makes perfect. If you're someone who has actually thought about that, you'll realize that the truth is that practice makes permanent. But even in that case, it doesn't necessarily make it permanent because of this eroding standards archetype. So let's take brushing my teeth. Now, if practice made perfect, I mean, in terms of habits, in terms of something that is automatic for me, brushing my teeth is got to be top of the list, right? I've done it twice a day for how many years of my life? 30 years of my life or something, right? So you would imagine that given all that time logged brushing my teeth, that I must be a master of brushing my teeth, right? Well, it turns out I went to the dentist for first time in too long a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, "Wow, you've been brushing your teeth all wrong." And it's not that I never learned the right way to do it. I guarantee at some point that I did, but I also guarantee that what happened was, even though I kept up that standard for a few days, maybe even a few weeks after it was established, it just kept eroding to the point where the practice that I was routinely engaging in, and I use the word routine there, habitually engaging in, let's say, was nothing like the standard that I originally set. So I got much, much worse at this. All right, that's kind of a lighthearted example, but take something like oncology. So oncologists are people who look for signs of cancerous tumors and things on body scans. Okay, there's research that shows that newer oncologists are actually better at detecting the cancerous growths than more experienced ones. And this is laid at the feet of the fact that oncologists don't regularly get immediate, tightly coupled feedback about whether or not they were right in the way that they read a scan. So they may, if they find out at all whether they were correct in saying that someone does have cancer or doesn't, it would be potentially months later on. In most cases, they may never even find out. And lacking that immediate feedback, they don't actually improve their ability to read it. Rather, their ability to read those scans decreases over time as a function of this eroding standards archetype. Okay, so tightly coupled feedback is very important. Now, the problem is that if our habits, the habits we're engaging in, aren't providing that immediate feedback, well, then you can imagine they're just going to keep eroding. They're going to keep getting less and less effective. So, let's say you are trying to get into better shape, right? If you know, one of the issues with exercise is, as effective as it is, it's effective over a long term. One bout of exercise doesn't put anyone into better shape. I mean, it's a minorly so, but not noticeably so, right? And so if you're not paying attention to all the positive feelings that come from getting exercise, that immediately show up once you do some exercise, you're going to miss them. And all you're going to pay attention to is the discomfort that it causes. That's the association you're going to have. So if you stick at it for months and months, you'll get that positive reward, but the association in your brain may not even establish itself at that point. And so, lacking that feedback, your exercise gets less and less vigorous, less and less intense over time due to eroding standards, due to the fact that all you're really experiencing is the discomfort associated with it, and it becomes less effective, right? So the habit has, in some sense, betrayed you in that way. There's another problem. There's another problem with habits. And this one is perhaps even deeper. And that is, when you increase the automaticity of certain behaviors, what you're essentially doing is putting your behaviors on autopilot. You're putting yourself on autopilot. We all know what this feels like. Like, how many of you actually think about driving to work when you drive to work? How many of you actually focus on brushing your teeth when you brush your teeth? Right? Because you've done it so many times, your brain, the subconscious, sort of takes over and you go into this autopilot mode. Now, why is this a problem? Well, one of the greatest predictors of happiness and life satisfaction is the degree to which you're engaged in present moment awareness, the degree to which you are, well, you can call it mindful, the degree to which you are here in this moment experiencing your life right now. The more your brain wanders, the more unhappy it is, the more unhappy you are. And so by automating, by increasing automation in your life and of your behaviors, what you're doing is allowing more of that wandering, encouraging more of that mind wandering. So what we end up with is this feeling of, yes, you've maybe habitualized your life. Maybe those are even towards habits that you identify as moving you towards a life that you want to have. But you have this feeling of being stuck, for example. You have this feeling of not making progress, of not enjoying your life, of having your life foist upon you. Well, if you're in autopilot all the time, of course your life feels foist upon you. Of course, it doesn't feel like you're actually making any meaningful choices because, in some sense, you aren't. All you're choosing is what to think about, whether things that happened in the past, tending to be regrets, or things that might happen in the future, which tend to cause anxiety. And that's not much of a choice, is it? Instead of actually recognizing that what you're choosing is the action that you're taking, you are farming that out to this automation, to this autopilot system. Okay? So, this points us in the direction of why habits would die off the way that they tend to do. People will be very successful for a few weeks at installing a new habit. They'll feel like it's going well, they're hitting it every day. But over time, what shows up? The habit becomes less effective at producing results because your standards for performing that habit erode and your happiness doesn't increase. Your feeling of well-being in your life doesn't increase, and in likelihood it probably decreases some because you're living more in autopilot mode. And so when you're engaged in that habit, the feedback that you're getting is mostly negative and the results are not what you want them to be. Of course it's going to disappear. Of course these habits are going to die off. So what do we do about this? Well, luckily there's a pretty simple, if not easy, solution, and that is present moment awareness. You could think of presence as being the keystone habit, though it's not really a habit, right? A habit being a series of behaviors that you engage in, whereas presence is more of a mindset. It's a psychological stance, the way I like to say it, as in your stance vis-a-vis what is happening in the world around you, you know, your own behaviors, how do you stand in regard to what's happening? So it's a psychological stance that you can build the tendency to rely on or to revert to over time. Things like, of course, meditation. Meditation, fantastic for this kind of thing, but it may not be for everybody. I like the analogy of meditation being lifting heavy weights. You can get in fantastic shape without ever lifting super heavy weights. But if you're up to it, lifting heavy weights has its own sort of set of benefits alongside those of lifting lighter weights, right? But there are other, presence supporting activities that you can engage in. Very simple ones. Just like I constantly advocate things like incidental workouts that you can throw in and pepper into your day whenever you find a moment, present moment awareness supporting habits, behaviors are similar to that. You can just throw them in. Do you notice you're looking at your phone? What would happen if you turned it off, purposely, conscientiously turned it off, faced it down, took a few breaths, looked around the room, felt your feet on the floor, that sort of thing? Okay, and this you can do whenever, wherever. There are no limitations on this sort of thing. And the wonderful thing about this is not only will this just increase your overall happiness, not only is this a keystone tendency, but it's also going to rescue the habits that you've been working so diligently to create. Because when you're paying attention, when you're aware and present in the moment, suddenly you're now open to receiving all of the feedback that is showing up immediately. So, yes, there's discomfort from exercise if you're not used to it, but you'll also notice the endorphins, and you may not notice the endorphins, but you'll notice the effect of the endorphins. You notice that you feel better about your life, about yourself. You feel like there's more possibility. You feel more capable after working out because now you're paying attention and you get that tightly coupled positive feedback, which reinforces the habit. You'll also, because you're paying attention, get in, prevent that eroding standards archetype from playing out because now you're really paying attention to how hard you're working. You're, going for that extra rep. You're paying attention to your technique, to use the exercise as an example. So you can see how present moment awareness would forestall that eroding standards problem that we discussed. And it's going to increase your happiness. You won't notice that autopilot decrease. So I challenge you to try this. Next time you're brushing your teeth, don't be listening to anything, don't be watching anything. Actually pay attention to brushing your teeth. See how much better of a job you do at doing it, and see how much more enjoyable the actual act of brushing your teeth can become just by paying attention to it. The quality of your attention, the psychological stance that you bring to an action as mundane and at this point habitualized as brushing your teeth. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and for all of you out there who support the channel, the content here, you have my eternal gratitude. All right, get out there, get after it, go earn that future.